Am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, good evening. It looks like we've got a really good turnout in the first of a series of 3 town halls tonight, the 17th and the 31st. I believe it's a good idea for us to start off this evening with a bit of air cleansing. Fresh air is good for the health of an HOA. First, I want to say that there will be time for interaction tonight between all of you and the board. To help clear the dust out of the air, we thought it would be a good idea to open up the second part of the meeting to questions, comments, and responses in an interactive way. Second, I'd like to say that your charge to us was to maintain a community-managed association rather than hiring a remote management company. That led us to the only HOA crisis management team that I know is in existence. We did look to find others, talk to attorneys, talk to accountants. There is one HOA crisis management team and they're working with us. Third, please listen to our board tonight as they describe the value that has derived from the consulting work. We have accomplished much. Our pursuit is continuity. We want to leave a base of documentation, proper policies, procedures, and training tools for future boards. You will hear descriptions tonight about what we needed to put in place, what we discovered along the way, and what still needs to be addressed. If you're not familiar with what we've done, please listen carefully tonight or call up a board member and ask how they see how things are going. Finally, it's always important to understand what facts are available to use to form our opinions. The imminent renewal of the consulting contract is not such a fact. There has been no discussion at the board about renewing the consulting contract. While we obviously expect to seek skills, knowledge, and abilities from outside of the SRA, from time to time that's necessary, but we're committed to a community-governed, staff-managed SRA. Dr. Haynes, from whom you will hear later, described the process we've been through using the following medical analogy. As a brain surgeon, I'll take his word. Over the course of 2019 and most of 2020, we, that is the SRA, did not feel good. We didn't know really why. Finally, we sought a diagnosis. We had tried various self-diagnostic tools, but we weren't feeling any better. We found an HOA doctor and we asked for a diagnosis. As is usually the case, the doctor wanted to do an exam. We asked joint partners to do that exam. They looked us over and came back with a combination of diagnoses that led us to create a health regimen for the SRA. They even spoke with over 24 people in the community just to see what our environment looked like. Their diagnoses revealed real issues that were affecting our health. Our issues were benchmarked against other HOAs and against the best practices in the industry. You'll hear more about that this evening. They wrote us a set of prescriptions. As we began to understand what was wrong with us, we were able to develop a treatment plan. We began to learn how to take care of our own health, and today we are feeling better. We have a ways to go, but we are optimistic that we will continue to improve. So here we are tonight, actually practicing part of that health regimen. It is a core part of the regimen. We are tonight communicating. So let's get to the business of this town hall. Could we have the first slides up, please? I'd appreciate that.
Yes.
I'm going to talk to these slides tonight very briefly because I want to talk about why we decided to set out in the strategic direction that we have. Next slide. I want to talk about how the association is supposed to work and how we are going to get there. And finally, I want to address what the SRA can do to be the association we all aspire to be. So the next slide, please. It disappeared on me. Are you there? Who has the screen?
Alec, I believe they're just trying to get that up right now. If you could just.
Okay. All right. Let's see what comes up. The next slide, please. You'll catch up with me. I'm really slow. Next slide. Okay. Why did we decide to make changes? Well, it was becoming more and more apparent that we didn't have a clear path to success. We weren't trained or skilled enough to deal with the changing dynamics of a maturing SRA. We started getting in each other's way. Projects, meetings, responses to residents spiraled out of control. Our documents revealed that we had 27 separate neighborhood homeowners associations with different and conflicting CC&Rs. We were and still are encumbered by embedded policies that didn't make sense in our current environment and had afforded us little flexibility. Next slide. How do we do business as a mature association of nearly 2,000 people? Well, first of all, the board governs, sets strategy and policy, and then the staff manages the affairs of the association. Most of the real governance work should be done at the committee level. It just isn't possible to do the work, discussion, and research that's necessary for us to take actions if we do it at board meetings. Most of the work delivering services and resources should be done by the staff, and that's where a lot of your interaction will be. The next slide, and what we can become is the best stewards of your property values, the environment, and the harmonious community that we're all a part of. So we've gone back to the strategic plan. We've tried to communicate better. We've done an inventory of our toolbox. We know what skills, knowledge, and abilities we had to acquire because we didn't have them. And we're working on putting together a history and a workable set of documents to build on into the future. We needed to understand our own reality, and I think we've come to grips with that. And one of the most important things to me is we need to unleash our imaginations to see what we can be. Let me now move to an introduction of the board. Next slide, please. And our executive director. Many of you know us. A few of you may even like us. I'm not sure, but maybe a few. Semiahmoo is growing. We have a lot of folks who haven't been here for decades, like some of the others. So some of us may be new to you. Your board is composed of Patricia Oliveros, Paul Greeno, Kurt Hagman, Steve Haynes, Helen Worley, who's the chairman of the election committee and a non-voting member, Bill McNally, Doug Woods, Nicole Newton, Steve Geisels, and myself. And then I would like to introduce to you your executive director of almost 34 years. Debbie Smith. I want to move the presentation on, and so I will introduce Mitch Waterman, CMCA. And Amber, could you check that you have the right set of slides up? Mitch? Mitch, you're muted. Technology is wonderful. Mitch is muted.
Alec, I'm well aware. Give me just a moment.
Thank you.
There they are.
Can you hear me, Alec?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, sir, we had to have a little transfer of authority there from one person to another. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Mitch Waterman, and I am one of the partners and joint partners, and I'm going to talk about the background in separating management from government. Next slide, please. Well, before we do that, let's talk about the legal hierarchy of documents in an HOA and all of this and how it plays into the discussion of what we're doing. Of course, there's always the federal law and state law and county and city, but as an HOA, you're a small city, and it starts with your plat map and then a recorded declaration and articles of incorporation and bylaws and rules and regs and policies. And these are actually legally prescribed documents. And these basically achieve three goals. And these are the legal goals by which an HOA exists: to preserve and protect the value of each member's real estate investment and equity, establish mechanisms for governing and funding, and establish rules and standards. Now, the higher up you go in this hierarchy, the least definition you'll find. And so as you get down to policies, you'll see a bigger policy that describes, or a document that tells you how to get something done. But at the higher up level, it says, make this happen. And as you go lower down, it's much more prescriptive and descriptive. And that's not what we found in your documents. Next. So governance, well, back in September of 2020, as Alex said, Joint Partners was asked to come in and do an assessment because there were some concerns. And what we discovered that the board of directors was never trained to operate a nonprofit corporation. No one could find anywhere any annual training that had ever been done involving legal concepts, insurance, your policies, procedures, the hierarchy of documents. There's no committee structure also. Most issues were worked at the board level. In fact, since there was no committee structure, everything fell to the directors to work. No clear separation between governance and management. On a year-to-year basis, new board would come on and they would walk in and start telling management how to operate. The association also did not have any legal expertise in the HOA business. I mean, if you drive a Porsche and you take it to your Porsche dealer and your transmission's having a problem, you're not going to bring it to the Porsche brake and clutch mechanic. You're going to bring it to the transmission person. It is a specific area of expertise, and you didn't have it. There was no governance or document review control also. You have very conflicted and disjointed documents. As you're going to hear more of, your compliance process, it was just very cumbersome and inequitable. Now, on the SRA Neighborhood Homeowners Association issue, everyone knows that there's some disjointedness there. But there's also a high potential that members or owners within those neighborhood homeowners associations are unaware that there may be personal liability risks in their association to them as individuals. The failure to correctly identify and resolve these common problems and infrastructure, well, then your infrastructure can fail and there would be potential lawsuits and loss of financial value, which goes against the core pillar reason why an HOA exists. So really, as we pointed out, without establishing clear boundaries and responsibilities for the design, the maintenance, performance of your systems and your subsystems, staff doesn't know how to respond when there's a problem. They don't know if it's their area or if it's not their area. These were core problems that we pointed out to the board back in September. And we also noted that the existing strategic plan had stalled. Next. So let me introduce Steve Geisels, SRA Director, to talk about governance today. Steve?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mitch. And yeah, I'm Steve Geisels, and I'm relatively new to the community, but certainly a new member of the board. Now going into my 3rd month. So like many of you on this call, I love this community, and I particularly love the passion and engagement of the community. And I'm not just talking about those who are working with me on the board. I mean, each and every one of you joining us tonight, and the countless others around this community who in big ways and in small ways are working to improve our community, because truly great communities are full of engaged, committed, and passionate people. And while I've only been on the board a short period of time, I really do enjoy working with my fellow board members to address the challenges that are faced in governing a large luxury residential community. So if we can move to the next slide here, I'd like to briefly discuss the process that Joint Partners has taken us through as a board. So I've been on organized boards, and I've been on disorganized boards. And I will tell you, it's a lot more fun and certainly productive to be on an organized board. And I think that's really what Joint Partners has been doing, is helping us organize ourselves so that we can create an effective governance structure that is lasting. So this governance structure is coming together. It is allowing us to accomplish what I see here is 5 things. First is the clarity of purpose, truly understanding our mission, our role, and our accountabilities. And just as important, what is not our role, so we don't drift into areas that take us off our focus, right? Which, for those of you who have sat on boards that sometimes are disorganized, you see the drift off the mission, you see the drift off the purpose of the organization. So number 2 is to be a more efficient, organized, and in a strategic, and then operate as a leadership team and a board. And you'll hear more details around how we're organizing ourselves to be more efficient and strategic. You'll hear more details around this work a little later in the presentation by Doug Woods. Number 3, make better and more informed decisions that are in total alignment with the vision and mission of the SRA, so that we can achieve better outcomes. And again, later on from Doug Woods, you'll actually hear the new vision and the new mission of the organization that we all consolidate. Boy, I'll tell you, that was countless hours and hours creating that, but I think it consolidated everyone. This is the mission, this is the vision that we see, and we direct all of our decision-making towards that vision, towards that mission. Number 4 is the acquisition of what I would call just knowledge in general, legal, compliance, operational knowledge. What do state laws and statutes say about the way we govern? We need to know that. And working with a consultant, we've been able to learn that process. What are these state laws? What do the statutes say? What do the SRA, CC&Rs actually say? And how can they be modified to be more helpful? What do the neighborhood homeowners association CCR say? We have 27 different CC&Rs. What do those say? And how do those governing documents impact our ability to act and make decisions? And finally, sustainability, right? That's, I think, is the ultimate outcome of the work that Joint Partners is doing. It better be the ultimate outcome of the work that Joint Partners is doing. And that is, we're building the kind of board structure that is sustainable and lasting, so that the next board and the next board members don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have this initial cost up front, right, to get the proper governing structure in place. And the actual structure then should last for many, many years. So from my perspective, and while I've only officially been on the board a couple of months here, the consultant is helpful, right, to the SRA. And in fact, as the president of the Erie Neighborhood HOA, I've actually implemented some of the practices and principles that I've gleaned from joint partners, and we've implemented some of those at the Erie. But I'm certainly not here tonight to justify all the costs and expenses of the consulting work, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean I'm advocating that we need to continue with joint partners. Their contract expires soon. Do we still need their services? Certainly the goal is for us to be a self-sustaining board without the need for a consultant. Are we there yet? I don't know. But I can tell you that that debate will likely happen soon, and the community's voice, all people's voices, will be heard in that issue. So with that, I'm going to kick it back to you, Mitch.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So let's talk about management. When we were here in September, we did talk to some 28 different people. And we also focused on what the management was doing at the time. Now, as a whole, the management team did not have the skills, knowledge, ability equal to the peers in other similar sized HOAs. For example, they had no HR integration. Maintenance employees were not provided with personal protective equipment. Higher employee turnover in the maintenance department. In the last 5 years, you've hired 10, 12 maintenance people. You have 4 here now. Every time you hired one and you lost that person, you lost all the effort that you put into training that person and bringing them on board and your investment in them. And that's a very expensive investment. And the turnover was just unacceptable. You have no IT support. You have no firewall. Your computers and printers do not network. It is unconscionable to some large degree that you're operating a business with over $1 million in assets or total revenues on an annual basis, and you're expecting your staff to operate with something more than Commodores, but that's what you're expecting them to do. You're not going to be successful that way. Your contracts. We reviewed contracts that you had been issuing. The contracts did not go through legal review or insurance reviews prior to signature. So they were not necessarily favorable if there was a conflict or a dispute in those contracts. The management team didn't understand how to utilize the governing documents. There was no annual maintenance plan. There was no clear understanding of ownership of assets, and management was continually in a reactive mode. Every new board came in, and their directions, they came in, they talked to them, there was no continuity. Purchase decisions were made on costs, not best value. And that's not good use of money, that's daylight madness. And so SRA has been involved, and they weren't involved in any professional organization. You were an island. And so you wouldn't have known how to operate a professional in-house HOA management team. Now, with that, I would like to have Debbie Smith talk about where management is today. Debbie, I'm handing it to you.
Thank you, Mitch. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending today's town hall. I really appreciate it. As said, I'm Debbie Smith, your executive director, and my job is to, can we go to the next slide, please? My job is to manage the day-to-day operations of our community and support the decisions of the board. That doesn't mean I'm a robot. If I disagree, they have to expect I get an opportunity for pushback to make my points. Once I've had that opportunity, it is my job to support the board's decisions. Management has a critical role in protecting the members' property values. As you are aware, a key reason for an association to exist is to preserve and protect the value of each member's real estate investment/equity. This is a big responsibility. How is that accomplished? We maintain the common areas, provide administrative services, and protect the infrastructure of the association. We perform the financial role, accounting and collections. We ensure compliance and architectural standards in the community. By performing these roles, we ensure continuity of operations and keeping the association operating efficiently. Next, our entire management team has been undergoing training and mentoring since September. We thought we knew our jobs, although we didn't know what we needed to know, and we are now well on our way to becoming a more professional managed HOA team. It's one thing to get training from a group of people. It's a separate thing to have those people alongside us supporting us to use these skills. During weekly staff meetings, we review assigned tasks, cross-communicate, provide current events of the board, and collect feedback from the staff that needs to go to the board. I now have HR support on personnel matters. A new employee manual was created and has been signed off by all employees. Employee orientation was well received by the staff, and they now have a clear understanding of how their work impacts the value of the membership. All employee work areas were evaluated, and PPE has now been provided. And I'm happy to say I'm now sitting in my new ergonomic office chair, which is quite comfortable. Thank you. Training in the maintenance department is underway. That includes operating the snowplow, taking direction, and working independently, and utilizing all SRA-owned power-operated tools and equipment. Joint partners will be working with the Director of Maintenance Operations to establish an annual maintenance plan, which will include specifying what tools and equipment, capital or operating expense are required to implement the plan. Next, please. With the separation between governance and management, this has empowered me to manage the association and staff, which has increased the staff's production and completion of work product. And I'm learning how to create a bottoms-up budget, which is a good thing. The association's IT needs will be presented to the board in April. And as the SRA is a member of the CAI, Community Association Institute, I will be tested to become a certified manager of the Community Association post-COVID impacts. It's true, we are undergoing change, and I'm here to tell you that these changes are for the better. Again, thank you for attending today's town hall, and I will turn it over to, I believe, finance.
Great, thank you, Debbie.
Okay.
My name is Jennifer Speidel. I'm a CPA, and I'm the other partner of Joint Partners. When we did the initial evaluation of SRA in 2020, we found financially that the SRA lacked many documented key financial policies. That financial statements were being produced in Excel, which increases the risk of fraud. The budgeting was not done using a bottom-up approach, but by taking last year's budget or forecast and estimate it using an inflation factor without comparing to the audited actuals of prior years. That in general, there were improper cash controls, which also puts the association at risk for fraud or embezzlement. And that funds are commingled, operations and reserves at the bank, which is not a best practice of CAI, the Community Association Institute. And that the SRA utilizes multiple banks, which is time consuming for staff. So with that background, I'm going to introduce the SRA Board Treasurer, Kurt Hagman, who will lead off the discussion with finances as they are today.
Kurt, you're muted.
Here we go.
There you go.
As Jennifer said, I'm Kurt Hagman. We've lived in Semiahmoo for 12 years. We live on Goshawk Road. I'm actually in a unique position in the sense that I served under the old regime and the new regime, because I was a board member in 2014 and 15, serving under Paul Atchison and Michael Coulthart. And then Alec asked me to join the current board in September when there was a resignation of the existing treasurer. And so I agreed to take this responsibility on until March 31st. There is certainly been helpful to me, since I don't have a very extensive financial background, to have joint partners and Jennifer to help with the financial affairs of the company or the association. And of course, in the future, if we move toward a staff managed and board governed situation, the treasurer does not necessarily have to be a CPA or someone who's has an extensive financial background, because they can rely on staff to know the accounting ins and outs. Anyway, let's move to the next slide, and I'm gonna first dispel, one kind of misconception is that the finances are not in good shape. In fact, at the end of 2020, we were actually in better financial situation than we were at the end of 2019. In the operating account, we actually had $30,000 more revenue than we spent. In the restricted reserve, we spent $188,000 on capital improvements. It was on budget. Total cash on hand at the end of last year, $964,200, and about half of that is in the restricted reserve for future capital projects, which we cannot use for operational use, but we certainly can use that money for investment purposes. In 2021, of course, this is a very different year. We went into the year thinking we were going to have a surplus because we had anticipated to get $252,000 from the real estate transfer fee, which we subsequently abandoned. So the forecast at the moment is a loss of just over $100,000 in the operating account for 2021. In the reserve account, we're going to spend a lot of money there too, more than we're taking in. We're going to spend $274,000, which is $161,000 more than the revenue that we get from dues that's allocated to restricted reserves. But we're catching up a little bit on what we need to spend in the capital area. And we're also, we reduced the dues that went toward the restricted reserve because in the end of 2019, we were 150% of fully funded. And although now we're going to be down substantially from that, we're still going to be over 100% fully funded at the end of this year. And with the interest rates being as low as they are, there's no real reason to have your money in our account that we can't make any real money on to help with our capital program. Anyway, at the end of the day, I calculated that we should have around $692,000 in cash at the end of this year. And about half of that, $305,000, will be in the restricted reserve. The basic message here is that we're still in very good financial situation, even though you can see that we are going to be somewhat lower financially than we were at the end of last year. So that's all I wanted to do. It's the introduction here, except to talk about the work that we've been doing with the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee was one of the first committees to get going under this system. And we've been able to get 4 policies approved by the board of directors. That includes the bank statement reconciliation process, which helps prevent fraud, the cash management policy, which segregates the operating and restricted funds. We always kind of separated them on paper, but not physically. Now we're going to be physically separating these 2 funds. And it also identifies how much cash is really available for investing while still keeping enough cash to handle the day-to-day operation. A capitalization policy has been implemented. The new threshold for capitalizing is $2,500. We have things on our capital list that are well under $1,000 that have been capitalized. And so it makes it a little bit cumbersome to depreciate small value items. And also it should be, the policy also states clearly that if once the money's in the restricted reserve, it must be spent on restricted reserve items. Now, I think we've always generally done that, but now this policy definitely states that that's the case. And then the fourth one that's been implemented is the ability to do electronic bill payments. And we really won't be able to do that until we get to the HOA bank, which Jennifer will talk about in a minute. There's 4 other policies that are under development. A document retention policy, which identifies the documents that are needed for doing our annual financial audits. The annual budget process, we have a process existing, but it doesn't have a role for the finance committee in that process. And so we've been working to identify a role for the finance committee in the budgeting process. We have an investment policy, but it needs to be updated, particularly in this low interest rate environment. And then we have the last one, which is the collection of overdue accounts. We have had various policies over the years, but never actually implemented as an official policy inside the organization. So we'll be tackling that as well. So all of these financial policies would not have been possible without the involvement of joint partners and Jennifer Spidel, sorry. So now I'll turn it back to Jennifer to talk about some of the specific day-to-day changes that have been made in the SRA office to implement some of the new policies. Jennifer?
Great, thank you, Kurt. Today, the financial budgeting and accounting software accounts, the general ledger accounts are aligned. And this means that the financial statements can be produced directly out of the accounting software instead of in Excel, which reduces your risk of fraud. And budgets are created starting with the 2021 budget with input from all stakeholders using a bottom-up budgeting method. These stakeholders include the executive director, committees, maintenance, actual historical expenses, main contractors such as legal and insurance, the reserve study, HR. And now bottom-up budgeting is a very detailed, and it tends to be the most accurate form of budgeting because you start at the bottom with your expenses and work your way up, including every single detail cost of a project, which leaves less room for error. Next slide. So I know that this slide is an eye exam, but the whole slide talks to preventing embezzlement. And please note that there has not been any record of embezzlement at SRA. This is very fortunate. However, unfortunately, HOAs are ripe with embezzlement, and recovering from embezzlement is a brutal and expensive endeavor. And a lot of people are not even getting prosecuted for the fraud that they commit. So what this slide tells you is that we have to put in an ounce of prevention, put in these internal controls in place to stay ahead of that potential problem. We get multiple people assigned to duties and involved in the process, and that's what helps prevent fraud. Next slide.
Okay.
Moving on to banking. Currently, the operating and reserve funds are still commingled and held at 3 different banks. However, in February, the board voted to move to one HOA bank, CIT Bank, and one local banking partner, Umpqua Bank, and that change is in process. The benefits of moving to an HOA bank are numerous, and they include better interest rates than we're currently receiving, the automatic sweeping of accounts to ensure FDIC compliance, Positive Pay, which is a fraud prevention tool related to the cashing of checks that the association writes. It also is going to streamline check signer updates and processes that staff and time that staff takes in order to transfer funds and update signers at these multiple banks. And the SRA is going to receive a multitude of free services that they're not currently receiving, one of which is automatic check scanning for the deposits of the checks. Overall, I think that you'll find that the changes, i.e. the treatments that Alex spoke to earlier made since our initial evaluation, will support the SRA to achieve its mission and vision. And it also supports the purpose of an HOA, which, just to remind you before we move on, is to preserve and protect the value of each member's real estate, their investment, establish the mechanisms for governance and funding, and establish rules and standards. And with that, I would like to turn this presentation over to SRA Director Doug Woods, who will discuss board organizational changes, the role of committees, and the updated mission and vision.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'd like to start by just stating that I thought Steve Geisels did a really great job of explaining how the board feels about where we are right now. Moving forward, I think the board is really in a strong position to be able to integrate all the changes and create an organization that's much stronger. I also want to thank everybody for taking the time to be here tonight and for the passion that we see in the neighborhood. We're all in the same boat, and I think we're all pulling on the same oar, going in the same direction. At least I think that's what we all want to see happen. And so I think we really want to make sure we get on the right foot, or the right starting point. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Since the beginning of the year, the board's implemented several procedural changes for the sake of efficiency in conducting our meetings. The first thing we did was implemented, and we are adhering to Robert's Rules of Order. And that's increased the efficiency of our board meetings significantly. Board meetings are now running about 2 hours, where in the past they've run 4+ hours. And we're getting a lot accomplished in that period of time. Part of that was to create a sergeant of arms role on the board. And Paul Greeno's been doing a great job at that. He enforces our Robert's Rules of Orders. He keeps us on track, keeps the order of our speakers, the motions, the amendments. And if somebody goes on too much, he'll cut them off. And the best outcome of all of that is that he tends to keep Alec on track, which is helpful for all of us. We implemented some communication rules. We now post agenda 40 hours in advance of all meetings. We are recording and posting our meetings on YouTube, and that creates a lot of convenience. If you can't be part of the meeting, at least you can go into YouTube, you can pull it up, and the good part about that is you can fast forward through the stuff that is just too boring. The other thing that we've done is that we've standardized meeting and agenda templates for the staff, which has created a lot of efficiency. You can imagine going after these meetings and typing up all the minutes before the meetings, creating all the agendas. Now all those are templated. It's very efficient and time-saving. One other thing that we've done, our CC&Rs and our bylaws are really silent as it relates to committees, with the exception in our CC&Rs of the ASC. So what we've done is we formalized the process for chartering committees. That required a minor amendment to Section 4 in our bylaws, but chartering committees is making a big difference. If we could go to the next slide. For those of us who are unfamiliar with what chartering a committee is all about, the charter is a founding document that helps the committees deliver and uphold effective governance. What we really get from these charters is clear authorization, clear roles, responsibilities are delineated, and deliverables for each of the committees it's just the deliverables are well articulated. We eliminate conflicted responsibilities. In other words, we don't have people on various committees asking maintenance to do certain things, or requiring marketing or our communication team to do certain things, accounting to do certain things. There's a line of chain of command that creating the charters creates. It formalizes minimum requirements for standing committees from year to year, so that there's continuity. We don't have to reinvent the wheel every year. Those charters are in place. Every year they get reviewed. Every year they get synced up with our strategic planning, and we come out with a much stronger group of committees that really have a sense of direction. The charters that we've completed to date are the Finance Committee, Governance Committee, the Elections Committee, and the Communications Committee. We have in process right now, and expect to have them done in the next, probably the next couple of months, is the ASC Committee Charter, Safety and Security Committee, the Maintenance Committee, and the Environment Committee. The committees are assigned objectives that achieve the board established strategic goals. And we'll go to the next slide here, and we'll talk a little bit about our strategic planning. We started the year off this year with 2 strategic planning sessions in January, which I think were really enlightening and really helpful, especially for us new guys that are new to the board. We developed first our mission and vision statements, and then we followed that by creating 1, 3, and 5-year goals. And the board members independently developed a laundry list of what we thought those 1, 3, and 5-year goals should be. We brought them back, we consolidated, we integrated them together, and we prioritized. So the board now assigns objectives to committees and management that align with our mission, that help us to achieve the community vision. So if we could go to the next slide. The vision statement that we developed, and this was developed by a group of, as Steve Geisels mentioned, it took some long hours and some real coordination and collaboration to come up with. But we've come up with a good vision statement. A good vision statement needs to be forward-looking. It needs to create a mental image of the ideal state of the organization. And it needs to inspire, it needs to be aspirational, and it should challenge those involved. So the mission statement, or the vision statement that we came up with, is that Semiahmoo will be the premier residential resort community in the Pacific Northwest. You want to go to the next slide, please? Our mission statement, and a mission statement is a concise explanation of the organization's reason for existence. It describes the organization's purpose, its overall intent. The mission statement supports the vision and serves to communicate purpose and direction to employees, customers, vendors, and stakeholders. So it really needs to work both internally and externally as a backup to our vision statement. So in the long process, we evolved, and this wasn't an easy thing to come up with. Our mission is to enhance and preserve the natural beauty, harmonious design, quality of life, and sense of community in Semiahmoo. We accomplish this by maintaining assets for safety, beauty, durability, and environmental compliance, communicating regularly and openly, managing funds in a responsible, sustainable manner, enforcing our rules, procedures, and covenants, and planning for the future with strategic initiatives and capital improvements. Next slide, please. So along with our vision and mission statement, as I mentioned, we compiled 1, 3, and 5-year goals, and they were independently generated by the directors, brought back into the board, and we then consolidated and collaboratively came up with the following goals. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So these are our prioritized goals for this year. One is to update our CCNRs, as it's been mentioned by both Mitch and Steve, and will be addressed a little bit more by Steve Haynes. Our CCNRs really need to be addressed. They're old. They're 35-year-old legalese. They're long. They integrate things that like rules and regs that really need to be in their own separate documents so that they can be updated and changed without having to amend our CCNRs. So updating our CCNRs is our first priority for the year. Having clear processes, procedures, and policies is our second priority. We want to make sure that our communication, the way we do things, is well documented so that from year to year, we have those processes and those procedures, those policies in place so that we don't reinvent that or just kind of meander along on a undefined path. The third goal is resolution of the neighborhood homeowner association issues and start building a real rapport and relationship between the SRA board and the boards of each of those HOAs. There's as you look at the various NOAs, we've got 27, I think 12 or 13 are actually organized. And so those that are unorganized, there is a lot of uncovered liability that we really need to focus on and make sure there's other things we don't know about in those organizations. So management of the SRA becomes a challenge when you have all of these different organizations out there that all have different responsibilities. So that's a big one. Communicate. We're going to communicate on with the membership on budget, on our audit, on our reserve plan, our 5-year funding plan. We want to create clear communication channels. Our communications committee is now headed by Alec, our president, and he is going to make sure that our communication with you all is solid and it's two-way communication, and that we can make sure that there's good understanding of what's going on. That is a parallel activity. It's not a fourth goal. It's really as important as any of the other goals. It's one of those that work consistently across all of our other stuff. And then the last goal for the year is we're committed to evolve the board from a managing board to a governing board. And there's a subtle difference, but a huge impact on that approach. So we want to have a board governed, staff managed HOA that has high quality training and skills, knowledge, abilities for all parties involved. And those are our goals for this year. You want to move to the next slide, please? Here's a quick summary of the 3-year strategic planning goals. These obviously aren't prioritized, and these may change because every year we're going to revisit our strategic plan and set our annual goals and prioritize our goals. But here are some things that came up. We want to be an example of a best-in-class HOA. We want to maintain continuity of governance and keep our affairs in order. We want our neighborhood homeowner associations engaged. We want to increase our amenities. We want to leverage our technology. We're in a time and we're in a place where there's really, if we pull together, there's really no reason that we can't increase the technology amenities for our community. Also, our technology amenities for our staff. Enforcement, equitable and fair enforcement of rules, regulations, our CCNRs. Communication of key performance indicators, realistic budget that correctly addresses maintenance and roads. We want to make sure that we're addressing wants versus needs and make sure that's communicated effectively. And we want to keep our strategic plan alive. Go to the next one. Our 5-year strategic, it's kind of the same way. SRA is financially strong and able to capture opportunity. And as we look at 5-year plans, they become fuzzier. Every year we're going to start to move these these up. And so hopefully in 5 years, we'll have attained a new revenue streams implemented that will fund modernization of utilities, the SRA Center, new amenities, the community that is informed, engaged, and supportive of governments, neighborhood homeowner associations that are collaborative with the SRA. And we want the board positions to be something that is sought, something that people want to be, something that's a little bit prestigious in the community. So with that, I thank you for listening. I'm going to pass this over to Dr. Steve Haynes, who is chairman of our ASC. And Steve, take it away.
Hi, I'm Steve Haynes. In the competition for being the most junior member of the board, I'm 1 week ahead of Steve, the other Steve. Joined the board in January, so I've been on the board for 2 months. I've watched the board very carefully, though, from my position on the governance committee and the architectural standards committee for the past little over a year. We've had a home in Semiahmoo for 16 years. We're committed to the community and are delighted to serve. The slide, please. So many of our policies and procedures are embedded in the CC&Rs, and the CC&Rs are deliberately slow and difficult to change. We have an incomplete and difficult to access set of rules and regulations and policies that the governance committee is working very hard on. Just as an example, the ASC policies are embedded for the most part in the CC&Rs, and therefore we have a great deal of difficulty keeping up with changes that would help the community. Every ASC enforcement action that's stated in the CC&Rs is a mandatory thing that we can't change. There's no discretion on the enforcement actions that we have to take. The compliance processes are cumbersome, lengthy, convoluted, impractical, and difficult to implement without creating legal risk for the association. They need to be streamlined and made adaptable to changing conditions. And since any change in the CC&Rs requires a vote of the entire community, the difficulty in keeping up with changes in favorite colors, styles of architecture, lighting, technology is immense. And we need the flexibility to stay current so that we can be responsive to the evolution of this community. Governance committee is working very hard to identify all the changes that it may bring forward to the association this year to clean up the CC&Rs and to move policies that should be in policy documents, not in the CCRs, in that direction. Please monitor our communications to the membership for updates in this process. Next slide. So we hope, as a result of all this work, to end the year with a revised set of CC&Rs that retain all the good parts and move the appropriate parts into more adaptable policies, procedures, and rules that allow us to be more responsive to the community. We hope to have the neighborhood HOAs and the SRA in much better alignment and organization. We expect to see that the staff, directors, and committee members are appropriately trained and have the necessary tools for success, and that the technology we use will result in more user-friendly website and better ways for the technology to support the staff and help the membership interact with the association. And now Helen Worley is going to talk about elections.
Muted.
Helen, are you muted?
She is.
I'm working on it. One moment.
Still muted.